He's the director.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. No, I'm glad you told me that. I would have, you know what? We would have been like 20 minutes in and I'd been like, shit.
Oops.
So,
Yeah.
all right. So Brad, let's go around the horn here. It's just three of us here talking. So Dave, tell everybody about yourself. Dave Schwartz.
Yeah. Well, I am a 30-year vet of TV animation. Started out as a storyboarder. I started up as a cleanup and revision artist, working for Brad, being driven crazy by Brad. And then eventually, over a number of years, when I got to Disney, I became a director. Directed shows at Disney and other studios. Did some comic book work along the way. Have done a lot of different things in the animation industry, and which we could talk about later on. And now I teach animation, primarily story and storyboard at the Cleveland Institute of Art in their animation department.
Awesome. And you're a phenomenal talent. I can tell everybody that Dave's drawings are some of the nicest I mean, the man can draw. So beautiful stuff. All right, Brad.
Thank you,
So let's move over to our next contestant, Brad Rader. So bachelor number 2, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm another got my first job in 1984 doing the storyboards on the Puppy's New Adventures, Rubik's Cube, and I didn't work on Mr. T. Spears was doing a Mr. T show. Then I worked doing storyboards. I directed in the 90s, done comics, gay porn illustration. Now.
Well, wait a second. You glossed over Batman. How everybody tell?
I worked on Batman, Gargoyles,
that little show.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Rainbow Bright, Alf Tales, Ghostbusters, King of the Hill, Bob's Burgers, and now I'm working on a new series called Bless the Hearts. Working on season 2, even as we speak. In fact, I'm waiting. I just downloaded the animatic. I'm doing what we call conforming, which is I have to make the storyboard that is shipped to the overseas animators match precisely to the frame the locked animatic. That is my current job. It's sort of like when I was doing way back in the day for Kevin on Alf Tales and Ghostbusters, where I was basically storyboard supervisor. It's the same thing on a different turn of the spiral. It's not very artistically rewarding. On the other hand, I get this. I feel like I'm sort of indulging my inner librarian.
Yeah, but I mean, all three of us have I think between the three of us, we probably worked for everybody in the industry. I know I've worked for probably everybody or close to it. So, and who I haven't worked for, you guys have probably worked for. So, there's a lot of experience in the room here, sitting here. So, so Brad, you started talking. So before I hit the record, you brought up a phenomenal, a very strong point about blocking. Somebody asked the question. Well, first of all, can you please repeat what you said? What you said before we started recording about blocking.
Well, I was just thinking about a big chunk of last week's Gab Fest was spent talking to Rachel. I forget her last name.
Rachel Baylett. Yeah.
Who's an acting coach, teaching acting to people in the industry, and she's great. I thought everything she said was really cool, but she didn't touch on something that I've found to be very important over the years, which is blocking. It's like it'd be as you would do in a live action rehearsal. You have to get the actors together and have them act it out in the space that they're going to be filming in or on stage or whatever, to make sure that everybody's in the right place at the right time to actually be able to do what they are called upon to do by the script. And that is, I can't imagine that she wouldn't deal with that with her acting coaching clients, because it's a really important part of acting.
Well, it's also important, just to kind of back that up a little bit, is that um, uh, I always preach understanding what the script is asking, or what it's saying, what it's saying on the surface, and what it's saying in the subtext, because that's going to dictate how you move the characters, where you move them, when you move them, and
Why they do what they do.
yes, yeah, exactly, why they do what they do. So it's just kind of reflecting back on what Rachel was talking about last week, and that is just kind of understanding your character, understanding what drives that character, because that's going, is it an extra layer to think about? Absolutely. But it makes your job as a storyteller so much easier, because you don't have to concoct things for the characters to do. They're just going to start doing them because you understand what they need to do, where they need to be, why. I think what it does is, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, both you and both Dave and Brad, that actually having done this as long as the three of us have done it, usually when we're drawing one scene, we're already about 3-4 scenes ahead.
It's chess. I always say it's like chess.
It's because basically you've already figured out what the characters have to do to get them to the next major story point.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I'll say that in my class, and I can hear the eyes rolling, like, oh, it's one more thing I have to think about. I said, it's an effort now, and you have to put that on your checklist. But ultimately, if you're doing storyboard long enough, you just start thinking that way.
Yeah.
And you can plan out your scenes on multiple levels.
Well, actually,
And you just, like I said, that allows you to think 2, 3, 4 scenes ahead. Actually, it's
like,
just kind of reflecting on Hitchcock a little bit. We talked about last week. Hitchcock was always, while he was shooting one movie, he was storyboarding his next film. Really, he could hand off the storyboards to anybody and just say, just follow the storyboard, shoot that.
Yeah.
And you come pretty close to having a Hitchcock picture, just because he worked it all out on paper.
Yeah.
well, that actually happened once. He was supposed to direct this movie, Wreck of the Mary Deer, and it ended up being directed by Roland Neame, I think, because Hitchcock had it all scripted, all planned out, every bit, and then at the last minute he directed something else. I think he directed North by Northwest or something.
Oh, that piece of garbage.
Oh, no, but actually it was really interesting watching a movie that he planned but didn't direct.
Yeah.
It was very much a Hitchcock movie.
Yeah.
I have a few of my students here from my classes that watch us, and
Hello,
I've
students.
told them, and I've told them that, I always say in the class that, in so many words, I always say it's like playing chess. And that's exactly what I'm thinking when I say it, but I've never talked about blocking your stage. And blocking is it is the same as staging. Somebody,
Yeah.
the same as staging. Yes, it is.
Well, the other thing that blocking helps you do, especially if you actually physically draw an overhead map of the set that you're working in, and even just plot out with letters, A, B, C, and with arrows, is that then when you plot your 180, you always know what the camera's going to see. You never have to wonder or make a mistake about what's in the background, because your diagram tells you exactly what you're going to see.
It's a very important point. I always tell people to put the aerial view, because it helps with like you understand where all your characters are. You're never in it. People get really caught up in the 180 and they get confused by it. And it's one of the easiest ways to unconfuse yourself is to do an aerial map, do an overhead view, because once you have that, now you know where the characters are moving, and you can do that throughout. Maybe there's a chunk of a paragraph that has certain things the characters are talking in in one area of a room and they have to walk over to another area of the room. It helps to know your space and your logistics. And one of the things that I think have helped a lot over the years is the usage now of 3D environments. At least all the action shows that I've worked on at Marvel or Warner Brothers have been either SketchUp or FBX files.
Mhm.
So that helps also, I believe, with the staging and the blocking, because you really can see your space in a three-dimensional environment. And so you know that where you have to move your camera and where it has to go. I think it helps quite a bit.
It helps you with your dialogue coverage too.
It does.
Because you know what kind of distance you have to travel, and you can layer dialogue over it.
Right.
And that way, I mean, I don't know if you notice. I notice in some of my neophyte students that once they discover camera moves, they just randomly use them because
they think they should.
Well, not only do they think they should, or well, I haven't used this yet.
Yeah,
so
right,
it's like, well, I say I haven't used my get out of jail card yet. So
Yeah.
And so you can, and I always tell them, try and hide your camera moves.
It should be invisible. Visible. Everything.
Yeah, it should be visible. So these overhead diagrams really help you figure out where you're going, how much time, how many steps, and you can also stay consistent if you're cutting on action, and it helps you understand words versus time, so that logically when you cut to a different shot, that it feels like, okay, the right amount of time has passed walking from here to there to pick up the glass or that type of thing. And that's an instinct that you start discovering the more you work with it.
Well, one of the things that I want, here's a trick, here's a pro tip right here. In action shows, what's the first thing that gets cut, Dave, for time?
Oh, what, action?
Action.
Action. Anything that doesn't have dialogue attached to it.
Exactly. So that's what I was going to say.
And not only in an action show, if you're a comedy person, always try and stick some dialogue on a gag so that they can't cut the gag, because that'll be the first thing, especially if writers run the show.
Yeah.
They will always cut anything that doesn't have any dialogue attached to it.
Yes, and any writers who watch this, the artists love you for it. So the trick that I've learned, I've had, matter of fact, I don't know I think it was Mike Gogan who told me this, another really great storyboard director. He said, always, if you can, put dialogue on action, because then they won't cut the action. So, but you run into timing problems and timing issues. And a lot of times the dialogue is something that they feel like it's crucial to the story or important to it. So if you cut lines of dialogue out, you're losing information. So they feel like, well, the action stuff sometimes isn't as necessary. So you cut it out. So, So Brad, any thoughts about that?
I don't disagree with anything anybody said.
Well, you can agree too.
Yeah, fantastic. No, I'm just thinking it's like the timing issue thing of running action over dialogue over action. I mean, sometimes that just doesn't work.
Oh, no, of course not.
It reminds me of, like, in comic books, it's one of my big, and so ubiquitous, you don't even notice it, but characters is like the old Stan Lee.
While they're fighting, they're talking.
Marvel comics where people would be, deciding the Gettysburg Address while they're having a punch out.
I agree with you.
There's not even time for one word, let alone like 3 paragraphs.
I agree with you, but
it was like really kind of like almost shocking when Richard Corbin back in when he was doing
Dan.
It's like there'd be fight scenes with no dialogue because there'd be no time for dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's stabbing you and the knife point goes into your sternum but doesn't quite get in. You don't have time to stop. You're not gonna say, okay, in 3 weeks this is gonna happen.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
I agree with you. I mean, I don't think anybody's disagreeing with it.
Gainsay anything you guys have said.
Yeah.
I don't know. it's actually one of the things that God, I'd like to do action adventure again. Because, sorry, if anybody, my employers are listening, I love my job, but I mean, it's like all this dialogue, writer-driven stuff.
Yeah.
Even if it's well written, which thank God, King of the Hill, Bob's Burgers, and Bless the Hearts are, really, really well written shows.
Yeah. And there's an art form to that. One of these days we'll do one of these and talk about that, because I think there's differences between the two for sure.
Oh, yeah.
And in action stuff, so in action stuff, I find that, I mean, I enjoy it. I think you have to gravitate. I think you have to enjoy doing it, because I think it's a lot more work in a lot of ways than doing maybe not. Well,
it's not true.
Yeah, maybe not.
Because it's like, it actually is not hard to draw somebody leaping through the air.
Yeah, that's true.
And they fly in and kick somebody out of the frame. That's
true.
easy. What's hard is drawing, what we were talking about last time, my storyboard test from hell, which is to do a dining room sequence like for King of the Hill.
And do it and make it interesting.
Make it
interesting.
work.
Yeah. You're
hard.
right.
And
you're right.
Do not appreciate it. They just go, yeah, whatever.
No, you're right. You're right. I mean, having done it, some of the hardest scenes I've ever done have never been action. Those are fun to do.
Right.
But it's the ones where they're sitting and having dinner and the talking head scenes, and you have to make sure that dialogue is serviced and taken care of. But we're maybe jumping through. I don't want to get too far off topic, I guess. Yeah, I want to talk about action tonight a little bit. So, I mean, but whatever. I try to keep these pretty loose, but if there's an important point, and that is an important point, you're absolutely right. I do agree with you. I think the hardest stuff is some of the quieter scenes and quieter things.
Especially when you're like, I think what you were talking about, Dave, the hard part about action stuff is you got to like pose everything out, and it's a lot of poses, right?
Yeah.
And that's a bitch. On the other hand, it's the same thing when you're like acting, when you've got the radio play for a show like
you really have to break it down.
You gotta make every inflection have some sort of reflection in the acting. Although Bob's Burgers was different, because in Bob's Burgers they were routinely going through and cutting out half of the poses that the storyboard artists would put in over the dialogue track. Fewer poses, but stronger poses.
So that's the stuff that I like. I mean, I like doing the action.
Yeah.
For me, the challenge was with action was, how do I make this look like not every other action scene that I've seen?
Right.
Because the other thing is that when you've done action a really long time, as with anything, you have your bag of tricks and your poses and your solutions to fights and that type of thing, your choreography, and which is fine. I always, so for me, first and foremost, I always approached every script as brand spanking, like I was making a brand new film and had to be something completely different than anything I had done before.
Well, that's what kind of gets you going. I think that's
what keeps it fresh for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Fresh.
It's you come up with some kind of choreography, and of course, you always go to your video shelf and pull out a Jackie Chan movie or some big action, exploding thing, and look for some clues of something that you haven't already pulled on to at least find some way to put that in there somewhere. I always enjoyed the sitting around the dinner table quieter moments, because I was more of an actor guy. So coming up with hand gestures, we talked about last week. We talked a little towards the end of the cast. We talked about Mort Drucker, and the thing I always loved about Mort Drucker was he always drew the best hands. And so hands became a real big thing for me. So using hands to illustrate what was going on with people sitting around the table or having quieter moments was always kind of my juice, and then head tilts and eye blinks or small expressions and things like that. as much as I like to do the big running around and jump and punch and flip and stuff, those quieter moments where it was more character and maybe a little sass, a little sarcasm, that was always actually a little more fun for me.
Well, not only in that, the fact of that, but also, Dave, like, you need those quiet scenes because the action stuff, if everything's action or too dynamic, then nothing stands out. You don't.
Yeah,
want
everything can't be gritting teeth.
Yeah. So I mean, that's a big deal. It's funny, when I started working on Batman Beyond, I came from Sony, and I came from working with you guys. It was off of, and they were, the first thing that they told me was to stop talking with my hands. And so, like, Batman, it's Bruce Wayne would never do that. I'm like, no, but other characters would. Like, Harry McGinnis, actually, I thought he was a kid. He's a very animated character. And I liked having him have some business with his hands when he was doing stuff.
Yeah.
But that was the first thing I got slapped back on. I would still remember that. It was like, maybe it was too much, and maybe I did too much, but it was like, this is Batman, not Men in Black. Like, these characters don't do that. So it was like, all right,
So sidebar. Okay. The two hand gestures that are, if you're a storyboard artist, the worst to do on your storyboards. There's two hand gestures. Do you know what they are?
Teapot.
There you go. Brad's got one.
Which one? Yeah, there you go.
That one. And the other one is, aha. The thing, so
I've never done either. So
my kids at CIA, the minute they see that and somebody else, oh, Dave's going to go after you after that.
I don't know. Yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying, and I've heard all that too. But my thing is, that's like saying, oh, never use the color blue. It's like,
well, here's the thing. There are times to use it.
It works.
Absolutely right. But
you got to know when to use it.
I found a lot of board artists kind of get in the habit of that. They don't even think about it. They just, and so by telling them they can't do it, forces them to think of something else as their first option. And then if I flagged it in the storyboard, then they had to justify it to me.
One of the things in talking about, like, camera movement, and you brought that up earlier, Dave, about, I always feel that the mark of a beginner usually is somebody who does a lot of extraneous camera moves for no good reason. In action stuff, the camera today especially is very fluid. I worked, the last thing I worked on at Marvel before I left was Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
And, we were moving the camera quite a bit, and we were moving it, in my opinion, a little too much. I thought we were moving it. They got into doing drip pans and I found it to be distracting from the scenes a little bit. We had another director who thought he was David Fincher as well. And the characters would move, and there would be some, the camera would kind of move with the movement, which was an interesting thing. But it also, again, I felt like it was distracting from the stuff. But having said that, camera movement is a big deal where you in action stuff, but you have to know when to move that camera, and also you have to know when to lock it in place.
Yeah.
Do you guys agree with that?
Absolutely. I found that a lot of that moving camera really came from the MTV video era, where somebody decided that the audience would be bored if they just put the camera on the band and let the band play.
Yeah.
And you'll notice, if you watch concert videos, if you watch even shows like American Idol or America's Got Talent or one of those things, the camera is always moving, and I scream at the TV, just stop so I can see, I can digest what I'm looking at here. Right. I just want to see the band. I want to see how they relate to each other.
Well, that's a very good point. Clarity,
Yeah.
Clarity in action. I mean, clarity in boarding, period, is vital. Without clarity, you have nothing. You don't have anything. So go ahead, Brad. Were you going to say something?
I wanted to, when I was directing at one point, I was talking to a guy working for me for the first time, who I'd known for quite a while. He was an old pro, more time in the business than me, and he basically was lazy. He wouldn't scene plan, so he just covered it by doing a lot of extraneous cutting. Just cutting all over the place. And I said, well, I want, I told him I didn't like that. And he started to argue with me. Well, in Hitchcock, in Psycho, there's a shower sequence where he has 20 cuts and in 20 seconds. And I was going,
but that's for a film.
But in Under Capricorn, all of his takes were 10 minutes long.
Well, didn't he understand emotion?
Well, but the thing is,
that's a different topic. I mean, we're talking.
That's kind of of a piece with what you're saying about extraneous camera moves.
Well, extraneous editing, anything is sure.
Well, well, I'm also thinking in terms of
to figure out the scene is not acceptable either.
Well, a guy like Hitchcock, if I know he probably didn't do it, but if he had to have a shot, he's in the editing room. He because it was live actors. I mean, if he needed to shoot some extra footage, it wasn't as big a deal as it is being in the editing room with your raw footage from animation, and you first of all you wish you had a shot that now you didn't have. But you can't, you've spent your budget. It's not like you can go and request more scenes, because it's going to put your film way behind.
Yeah.
You don't have the option to go back and say, oh, well, I'll just pick up that shot. So you really have to think in terms of master shots and then your pickup shots. And so we used to do, I think at Sony, we used to do the master shot, and then after the master shot, if you thought there might be some, you wanted some extra cuts, you'd kind of put that afterwards. Like on Jumanji, we would kind of maybe do that. And I'd put some extra shots on the back end to be included in the footage, because you could only ship so much footage per 20-minute episode. So if I could include that in there, then I had the option to do cutaways. And of course, it was also a lot easier once we started editing on Avids, because you could go in and pull a reaction shot from someplace else completely different and digitally stick it in there and cover what you didn't have.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference.
Well, you were creating in a way, coverage for yourself by doing that.
Yeah. But that constant planning, it's just knowing what you need, how much of it you need.
My visual is always Mr. Spock's chess set in Star Trek, like 5-level chessboard.
Yeah.
That he had, because that's what it feels like some of the time doing this stuff. But getting back, we'll get into editing in a second, but camera movement, is a very, especially in today, there's no doubt that it's evolved from what it was, even in the late 90s. We would do a small pan on that. You'd have some action stuff where you'd pan around, but what we're doing today is much different. I mean, it's, the camera is constantly moving, and it's with action, and it's always within the movement. And I would say for myself, doing that work, the first and foremost is it's all about clarity. And if you get too caught up in the moving camera and you're not careful, it can become Michael Bay. It can become too much.
Way too much.
But having said that, that is the style today. And it's definitely, there's more of it than there ever was, I'd say even 5 years ago. And I think part of the reason why it's with the usage of Storyboard Pro and Toon Boom, because now it's like a new toy. You can move that camera around in Toon Boom, and so therefore a lot of people use it and do it. Whereas when you were doing pencil and paper, or maybe Photoshop, you weren't really moving that camera as much. It was more work to move the camera and do that stuff.
Absolutely.
So it was more restrained.
Well, you had to figure out what the animation camera would see.
Yeah.
And then actually trick it in giving you, banana pans and all kinds of, special effects shots, which, it can be done much differently now.
Yes. And I think, and also I think timing wise too, now you can, you can actually pose that where you don't need a stopwatch anymore to slug a board.
I know.
You can just go and do it, which I think is nice. I do think that is the one huge advantage of Toon Boom that I do like, is being able to see the action almost in real time as to how it flows and how it feels.
Well, I have to say though that when I started directing, I said I would do a rough time on an act, and I guess especially between that and starting out boarding on paper, it really developed my mind in being able to see things move, make it move, figure out the timing, and so it really has enabled me to more quickly look at things and figure out what needs to happen and how to do quick fixes. Just because I didn't have all the razzle dazzle that digital gives you.
Yeah.
I was telling my class the other day, since it used to be when somebody would turn in an act on paper, I'd put it in my hand and just go like this. And I could tell if it was light in if they did it enough, just because I knew it, if you boarded it the right way, I knew how much what that felt like pound.
It was 220 pages. Anything less than that was you probably light.
Yeah.
If you went too far over that, it was too much. Like 220 for me always seemed to be like, that was the perfect 3-panel grid kind of thing.
I was between like 175 to 220, somewhere around there. I knew I had a good, healthy 6.5 minute act.
Can you imagine how many boards that would be today? How many pages from a Toon Boom show? It's got to be double, at least double, probably triple at what it was with all the and everything. So, all right. So Brad brought up editing. So editing for action. I know for me, editing is probably one of the most important aspects of filmmaking. And I think that, it depends. Action, the way that I always think about my boards, if I'm doing, you brought up Brad about the guy who told you about Psycho. Well, of course there were 20, he was matching the stabbing beats, if that's the scene he's talking about, the shower scene. So Hitchcock, it was brilliant because it was what you didn't, it made you feel like there was a violent act of murder going on, but you never saw the knife plunge into her. You never saw blood.
It was disorienting.
It was disorienting, and it was because of the cuts. It was the rhythm of the cuts that were.
And
there.
Hitchcock didn't want to. He wasn't ready to reveal who the murderer was.
Right.
Well, actually, what I read was he had, every time you saw the mother character, it was a different actor performing the role, so you could never get a fix on who it was.
Oh, cool! I didn't know that. That's
I didn't know
nice.
that either. That's cool. That's some behind the scenes trivia. But I think we did touch on this a little bit, Dave. With you, where you were saying like, about doing a quiet scene and doing, and there's a rhythm to boarding. I mean, and the cutting and the cuts go with that. And for action stuff, generally speaking, it's going to cut more than King of the Hill. You're not going, King of the Hill, you're going to create a great master shot, and you're going to work off of that master shot with your posing and your acting. With action, you can have you should have a great master shot, but from that, the characters are moving, they're fluid. So things change very quickly. They're not standing in one place for a long period of time.
Right.
They're, so you have to account for that. And that's where the blocking and the staging comes in, and exactly what you were saying, Dave, like, in the sense of you have to be playing 3-dimensional chess, because you have to know that these characters have to end. You might have 2 pages of action. By the 3rd page, they have to be at a certain location, and you have to get them from point A to S in that amount of time of those 2 pages.
Yeah.
So you have to account for that. But I also think that editing, editing plays a vital role in emotion, and it plays a vital role in what you can, how you make an audience feel about something, and how you cut and where you cut. And I always talk about transitions. I think that, you know, the more clever film, you know, people that are good with transitions are usually people that are in my opinion, better directors. And they're the people who think like, okay, how can I, like, if I do a match cut here, or I do a, you know, some sort of transition from my scenes in a way that isn't just a cross dissolve. I mean, and it's fine. Like, you can put it in there, or you can put stuff in there. But I think that that's an important thing, and people kind of don't talk about that very much.
The editing, for me, it always has to make an emotional statement.
Yes.
So as a storyboard artist, you know, you're also like you're the first wave director.
Yes.
Because you're interpreting the script and you're putting it on in these panels and kind of deciding first round what the camera's going to see. So you have to figure out, okay, first of all, what does the scene need to tell the audience? And in what order do I want to reveal these things to the audience so that they're feeling it, they understand, they're never lost, they know who's going where and what direction, where they are in the room. Have I set all the goodies up so that if in the midst of a fight somebody picks up a statue off a pedestal, that we kind of showed it to them in the master shot. So you know, there's a logic to why things are happening. Actually, one of the things that I wanted to ask Brad was because I think even though I've done a lot of action and I enjoy it and hopefully I do it well, to me, Brad was always, I always felt my better when it came to that. And so I was always kind of curious, just to maybe Brad talk a little bit about, you get a script that's got a big action scene. Go through your process before you even put some markings down on a piece of paper. What's your process in planning how you're gonna make that thing happen?
Well, I haven't done it in 10 years, so this is like talking from memory.
Well,
but I would, you know, do the shot list. I'd figure out who the characters are, how many characters there are. I would place them.
When you say place them, Brad, what do you mean by place them?
At a certain point, you actually have to start drawing. Sometimes I'll try and put that off for as long as I can. But, you know, actually it's weird. In the last, on Bob's Burgers, actually, the directors did the thumbnails, so I wasn't doing that for the last few years.
So Brad, when back in the day when we were directing Space Monkeys, and for those of you that don't know what Captain Singing the Space Monkeys is, you can go on YouTube and watch some episodes, and they're either directed by Brad or by me.
And I worked on revising.
And Dave, So the thing is that we had, you know, in a lot of cases they weren't just straight on action sequences because for crying out loud, they were monkeys. So we had to interject a little comedy into it too. So not only did we have to, they were monkeys who could do things that people can't do. So we had the difficulty of plotting their action with more humor and abilities to do things that humans can't do, and that made it fun, but that also made it very difficult. So Brad, when you got a Space Monkeys script and we're kind of getting ready to hand out to your board guys, was there anything special that you told them as far as how to handle those kind of scenes?
Well, if I had a movie in mind that you think in terms of, actually it was one of the things that I really liked Kevin Altieri did. He'd like say, okay, think in terms of this movie, right? So watch this movie before you start boarding. I mean, that was actually how I discovered Val Lewton back on working on Batman. So, this is like Night of the Demon, that scene in Night of the Demon where
Yeah.
this happens. So I went and watched Night of the Demon and went, whoa, what a cool movie. And then I went out and watched all the Val Lutons.
Mhm.
Well, it puts you in that mindset too. And there's a lot, the way they shoot the scenes, the way the scenes are lit, right, Brad? The way it's edited, all of those things factor in. So when he's telling you to watch the movie, it's like you're watching a style. You're watching an artist's style.
Well, and also actually, we're talking in terms of blocking, but I've also found that lighting can be very, what's the word I want? It can help orient the viewer. Because if you set the light source, then you got to keep the light source consistent throughout the scene, and it helps the viewer know where they are spatially.
I think that's a very salient point. Very few shows, unless the lighting is a specific thing in the show,
Right.
they stay away from it.
They don't want lighting, like I'm
right. Marvel didn't. They literally because of the budget, they didn't have a budget for it, so they took out shadows in the show, which was a bad decision. But it made the show. It took the richness away from stuff, but also you couldn't play with shadow. You couldn't do things, and that was tough.
Well, it was tough, but it was interesting. It was like what you were talking about. Don't use this gesture, right?
Yeah.
When you have to give the effect of lighting but can't use shadows, you have to be pretty inventive.
You have to figure out what to do. Yeah. You have to
figure out how to get the same effect without using shadows, which I thought.
Yeah.
Bob's Burgers is a quality show. That's all I can say.
Yeah. Yep. It was tough. I mean, it makes it tough sometimes when you take for budgetary reasons, you take things out.
I don't even know if it's budgetary. I think it's stylistically. I mean, the Lauren Bouchard will, have something real specific in his head, and he was real good at getting it from the people who are working for him. It's sort of tough when you're not in control, but a certain amount of security that comes from having it from a strong leader.
So let's just go right from beginning to end here. So in terms of how we would approach boarding an action show. So let's say we're all three on the same team, story team, and we get launched. We're given a script. So when you get the script, what's the first thing that you guys do? I mean, besides, I should say read it, obviously, but.
Well, I mean, the first thing is who gets what. I mean, Are you storyboarding the action climax of the episode, or are you doing the first action set piece?
All right, let's say
Batman for Warner Brothers back in the early aughts. I was doing the well, actually, this happened on the first season 1 too, when I was doing this show called Hearts of Steel. And, I was doing it's a two-parter. I was doing the big action climax in Act 3, but by the time it got to me, all the good action bits for like fighting killer cyborg robots had been used in the first 2/3 of the episode. And the only thing I could come up with was the Terminator Batman robot, the scallops on his ears and his fins on his forearm could like extend Terminator 2 style. That was all I could come up with. And so he was doing it over and over again. And it was like, thank God that whole fight sequence was cut, because they realized they didn't have time in the episode for the Terminator Batman robot to show up. They saved it for a future episode.
Yeah, I mean, there's a build, right? I mean, that's the whole thing. I always tell you're speaking exactly to what I do. Like, I usually give my students a assignment at the end of, when we reach the end of the semester, the last 4 weeks, and each person is assigned sections of the script. And it's, like I've given them Mad Love, I've given them Mask of the Phantasm, for Batman stuff, let's just say. So the purpose, but I always tell them, you can't I want you working as a group, because for the very reason that you brought up, you can't do like big, huge action set pieces when you're only supposed to be doing a small little set.
Well, actually, I was trying to make it's very much your point, but I was doing an episode. It was a Poison Ivy episode, and I was looking at the board. I was doing Act 3, and I was looking at the storyboard for Act 1, where it's like Batman and Robin and Batgirl or whoever are fighting Poison Ivy. It's this big balls to the wall action set piece that just went on and on and on and on, and I was sitting going, whoa.
Yeah.
I mean, so when it came to me, well, first of all, the script was Poison Ivy gets the drop on Batman and Batgirl, and she attacks them, and the script, the scene direction of the script was big fight scene ensues. I was going, and I just had them, since everything had been used, I just had her get them right away with no fight scene at all.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it had all been done in Act 1. What can I do? Why don't you, like, you know, shave off some of those beats and give them to me?
Yeah.
You know, but we didn't even get that far. I just like said, the hell with this, and had her like capture them immediately with no fight scene at all.
Yeah.
It wasn't kicked back to me, so I guess it was okay.
Well, I think, you know, so if we were all three on a story team, we get launched. Let's say that I get Act 1, Dave gets Act 2, and you get Act 3. You know, so now we're working together as the team on this thing. Ideally, what would you want to do if you were directing the show, Brad? How would you approach this?
Well, I guess you'd have to like plot out where the high points are and who's going to get what.
Yeah.
Hopefully the script would give you some help.
Well, you would also, but I also feel like it's the job of the board artist as well to discuss that with the director, and it's the job of the director.
It's the job of the director to. I mean, I've worked on some series where I get handed the script at the same time as the director, and there's no pre-thought going into it. Of course, these are like action adventure shows.
Well, I mean, but it doesn't matter. It's still, you know, it should still be the same same rules should still apply for that, you know.
But I mean, I would just sort of like the good old days where Vic Cook would go and thumbnail out big chunks of the storyboard on the script don't seem to apply anymore.
Yeah, that was the Alan Zaslav school of storyboarding at Disney when we were doing Chippendales Rescue Rangers. I mean, you would sit down in his office and he would have a big formal handout.
Mm-hmm.
And
he basically, and Davis Doy, I think, would do the same thing when I was doing Capital Critters. Basically, when he handed you the script, he had already thumbnailed little drawings, little setups.
So you wouldn't have to like figure out what he had in mind because he had it right there.
Yeah, I mean, now either you used it, you know, or he would say, okay, well, here's what I had in mind, you know. If you don't want to use it, you don't have to use it, but you know, here you go, you know, which was a thinly veiled, I'd like you to use it. So, but
I assume that if he goes all the trouble to draw it out, that he or she
they want you.
Well, that message was usually lost on me, you know, because I always had my own ideas of how to do things. You know,
but then you can say, hey, that's wonderful. I really like what you did, but here's my idea.
Yeah. So, you know, sometimes Davis or even Al will kind of go, oh, so you kind of went your own way. Yeah, I did, you know, and he goes, oh, okay, you know, and then you kind of get that. It's interesting. Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. We'll go with that, you know, but, you know, so yes, I mean, normally if a director should have some ramp up time so that if there's something very specific in mind that they can tell you before you walk out of the office, so that, you know, you make your life easy because you don't have to either reboard something, or you make the director's easy because he or she doesn't have to reboard it because it's not the way it should. I had a director like that just micromanaged everything.
Yeah, I don't like that.
To the point where I was afraid to put a line down. I wound up like I wound up at my house, laying on the couch, you know, in week number 5 of a 6-week rotation, and I still hadn't drawn much of anything because this guy had just beaten me down so bad.
Yeah.
And then I get the call saying, we're going to send a guy out to your house to pick up whatever you have on your storyboard. I'm going, hamana, hama, 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 hama.
Yeah, I don't like that. I mean, I think that, you know, there's a happy medium where, you know, if there's some shot that you really want and you're like, look, this is really important, by all means, as a director, I would do that. I would
Yeah.
lay something out. But I trust my board artists. Like I would feel like, and I guess for me, the beauty of it is people discovering things that you would never think of. And you're like,
Right.
that's great. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
And if you're too heavy handed, like you said, Dave, you know, you end up second guessing everything. So you never come up, or you're too afraid to give those thoughts in those moments that probably would make the show better. But, you know, you don't want somebody to go, no, that's wrong. And that's not what we want. You know, so I think that for myself, like, so if we were working on this show together, I would want to sit down with the two of you, and, you know, in the very beginning, and just talk about, like Brad said, about like beats of that board, to say, okay, I have an action sequence. We all have action sequences in our board. Okay. Mine should probably be the least, you know, it should be this, and it should probably not be the most intense action stuff. The same, you know, Dave, yours builds on it because you're act 2, and Brad should have the big set piece at the very end of the
Right.
show.
Though Act 2, because it's Act 2, it's going to have the most exposition in it. So I'm actually going to have, I'm going to have the most of the talking of the planning, the getting ready to go into attack mode.
Yeah.
So basically, my Act 2 is going to be ramping up to hopefully the big battle in Act 3.
You are going to be setting up Act 3, which is why it's really important that you and Brad talk, because you guys, and it's important that I talk to all 3, because I'm setting the stuff up in the beginning that leads into what you're doing. But what you're doing is leading into Brad, and what Brad's doing may pay off. It should probably something that happened in the first act. So it's all interconnected.
Right.
And I think that, you know, that the best action stuff, in my opinion, is where you have that discussion with the board artists. You're in a launch, you're sitting there, and the board artists talk to each other, and they say, okay, hey, you know, like you said, Dave, like, you're setting Brad up for everything. So whatever you're doing, he can't contradict that. And there's nothing worse than that. When people don't talk, and you get some brilliant Act 3 thing that doesn't work because Act 2 wasn't set up that way.
Well, and the other thing too, which is important, is that, you know, it behooves me to go over to Brad's office and say, can I see like the first 3 pages of your act so that I can end mine somewhere in the same setup for you, so it hooks up after the commercial?
Yeah. You know,
Well,
I mean,
you know,
a lot of directors don't break up boards that way. They break up boards by location.
right.
To avoid that very issue.
Yeah, I mean, mentioning Vic Cook sometimes would say, okay, well, I'll get all the scenes that take place in the lab, you know, and I'm going to give them to so-and-so. And then I'll take all the scenes that take place out on the street. And then, you know, and so at least you can be somewhat consistent.
I think sometimes things take place in a show that even if you're in the same location, it can also contradict, you know, if you're not careful, you can contradict. I think it's probably a better way. I personally, I don't know if I have a preference, actually. I don't, because I've worked both ways. Do you guys have a preference? Like,
well, I think it completely depends on who my team is, you know, because that's the other thing too, as a director,
casting.
I'm going to know which one of my board people handles these things better. So, you know, I might have 3 rock stars, and so I can kind of, okay, well, I can just divide it up. You know, I'll give you 15 pages and you 15 pages and you 15 pages. That's assuming that it's a Disney script. Otherwise, if it's a Warner script, then you get 10 pages and you get 10 pages and you get 8 pages, but you have the fight scene that says, and the battle ensues, which will eat up. But so, you know, so you have to cast properly too. And sometimes, you know, and I think the hardest part of one of the hardest parts of being a director is that sometimes you don't, you have a job and a responsibility too. So you have to cast the best people for the best parts. And sometimes you don't always spread it around evenly.
Yeah.
So sometimes you just kind of go, well, look at, again, it's for this, number one, it's for the sake of the story and for the sake of my film. So I have to do it this way, or I'll make it up to you later. I'll give you a fight scene next time. But this is Batman and the Joker. It's got to be, epic.
Yeah.
And so I need Brad Rader because he's my Batman Joker guy.
Yeah.
And I need it really cinematic, and I need a lot of action. So that happens. What's that?
But funny at the same time.
Yeah.
I had a point I wanted to make that is kind of off topic, but it's something that occurred to me when you were talking about, micromanaging directors.
Yeah.
And it's what I call the proximity gag. Whereas you're boarding along and you have two characters next to each other in a certain situation, and you think, ooh, they could do X, Y, Z. That's not in the script. Nobody else thought of it, but it's this golden opportunity to do this really cool thing.
Yep.
And sometimes it won't fly because it pulls everything in a different direction. But I mean, I remember when I was doing a Batman episode where it was actually the first act of Hearts of Steel, where Batman confronts this cyborg briefcase robot with a laser eye, and the briefcase robot with spider legs and a big telescoping eye had just done a bunch of information theft and was waiting to ride the elevator to go to the roof, and the door opens and Batman steps out. Da, 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 big reveal on Batman, first time in the episode. And I was going, oh, you have to let me do this, Bruce. The robot with the laser eye strafes the elevator, severing the cable, and the elevator drops, and Batman, instead of falling with the elevator, leaps out onto the floor, the floor between the elevator shaft and the floor, and grabs it and doesn't fall, but that gives the robot a chance to escape, and it's not in the script. And Bruce had this kind of like thing against exactly that kind of action beat, like, oh, the dropping elevator, no, that's lame. And I said, oh, please let me. And he let me.
Yeah, sometimes begging does work.
Right. Yeah, sometimes it does. Sometimes it works.
Well, and also, in my opinion, it was a real economical way to solve the action problem. Instead of a big fight scene there, you delay it yet another beat till they reach the roof.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it also shows that the robot is more foreboding and menacing than just a simple, fight. Like, it's the robot's actually kind of smart to do that. So it's, there's a lot of things that are implied with that probably make it a stronger story point. You're making your villain more interesting, so to speak.
Well, that's also the sign of a really good director.
Yeah. The robot basically self-immolates to fulfill its mission.
Yeah.
And I was like going, I wanted to make people have a tear in their eyes, because that was such a cool little robot.
So yeah, I mean, but see, that's the whole thing, like finding intent as well, and intent is never. I mean, I know we've talked about this before, but intent is never in the script. It's in the script, but it's not written down as a direction. It's not. You're not telling people like, hey, we want people to feel this.
Everything, they have to use subtext.
Yes.
As well.
So visually, we have to find subtext, and we have to find the subtext and put it into the.
Right.
I mean, for myself, one of the movies that I think is just everybody should watch is The Graduate, because I think The Graduate is rife with visual subtext and metaphor throughout the entire film.
Yeah,
that and American
absolutely.
Beauty.
And it does great transitions.
Right, and it does amazing transitions. I mean, some of the more iconic transitions in film were in The Graduate, and I think that I always find it interesting because he came from Broadway. Mike Nichols came from Broadway, and he was, I think that was his second film. I think he had done one other one prior to that.
And a comedian. He was a comedian.
Yeah, and people, when you think of somebody coming from Broadway, you don't think of him as somebody who's going to be a maestro of cinema with visual metaphor. You think they're going to shoot everything wide, on wides and like a stage play. And I just find that movie, so fascinating because my God, that transition from when he's fantasizing, he's in the pool and he's fantasizing about Mrs. Robinson. So he leaps out of the pool and then he leaps onto her in the bed. And then the dad says, there's the audio transition, of Benjamin, what are you doing? And he's still in the pool. And it's like, it's just brilliant. There's some brilliant stuff there. And I think one of the best ones is at the very end of the film, not the very end, but the end, where Mrs. Robinson finally has her confrontation and she says, if you don't get out of here, I'm going to tell my daughter. And he tells her, and he takes all the power away from her. And if you watch the movie, it's a camera move and it's brilliant. He and the daughter exit, and it pans over to Anne Bancroft, and she's just tiny and in a corner. But it's a camera move to just show how now she has had all of the power stripped away from her, and now she's this pathetic, character that she has no power over them whatsoever. And I think that there's such a brilliance to that, and it's all done in a camera move, and there's nothing overly fancy about it. There's nothing, there's not all kinds of CG filters or anything. It's just a simple
there's
camera move.
no dialogue to it's all done with acting and cutting
and camera lenses. I mean, the camera lenses, definitely affect the scenes and how, people look in frame and in camera as well. But I mean, that's all it is. It's all done in camera. There's nothing, but to me, that's masterful because when you're on that level of filmmaking, to me, I think you're making brilliant stuff. And I think it's very hard to get to that level. But I think if you're constantly aware of it, you can get there some of the time. Whereas if you're oblivious to it, you don't get there at all, or by accident.
So have you ever, because that's my favorite Mike Nichols movie.
Yeah, mine too.
What's that one? Jack Nicholson and Art Garfunkel, Carnal Knowledge.
Carnal Knowledge, yeah.
I seen that once, and I was kind of like, not so much. But
yeah.
Watch it again with all the stuff you're saying about The Graduate to see if that's there also.
God, it's been so long. But that movie doesn't resonate. So I would,
Other movies, like he did this movie with and Meryl Streep and Jack Nicholson. It was like, yeah, that's so nice.
Yeah, I don't think he ever topped The Graduate. I think The Graduate's his masterpiece. It's and I think American Beauty is very, is right in line. Not that that's a Mike Nichols film, but it's the other movie that I always use as an example. And he came from Broadway as well. I think that was his first film, and that movie has tons of metaphor. If you watch,
Right.
And how it builds. And I know, like we're talking about action stuff, people are probably like, oh, well, that's, there's metaphor in action shows all the time. Like there's things that you can find if you're looking for that, if you're so inclined. And I think, Batman had moments in there that were on par with that, in the sense that you had some brilliant transitions. There were some brilliant moments of camera usage. So it can be done, and look at the results. People talk about, we'll talk about the show after we're gone. The work will stand on its own merits for a very long time. And I think that's what ultimately, I guess, what leads, it's like what all of us strive for. You want to create something that you can hang your hat on and say that I did that. Those were my moments of doing those, that's mine. I did that shot, you know.
Yeah. Well, actually, one of my sadnesses about the last 10 years of my career is that I don't get to have those moments anymore.
Yeah.
I'm working on a writer-driven show where they micromanage it, and it's other people work on my stuff, reboarding it. I reboard other people's stuff. The last 10 years have been a very long, egoless experience for me. I'm learning to let go of my ego.
Well, Brad, you said that you had some stuff on your website. Do you want to show people some of the action stuff that you've done? Do you have stuff you want to show?
Sure.
I don't want to put you on the spot.
I love showing my stuff. I'm a big fan of my own work. I mean,
so I didn't want to put you on the spot with, you know, if you wanted to, I'm sure people would love to see some of the stuff that that you have. And
well, okay, and also we need to then redefine what action is. Hold on, let me
so do you
up here.
All right. So Dave, you have any thoughts while Brad's queuing stuff up?
Well, I was going to ask both you and Brad. You know, we've talked about when we're getting ready to do an action sequence that we often go to movies. You know, and you know, I always try to encourage my students to always think of, even though it's animation, always think in terms of it being live action. So that you're not falling back on, again, you're just bag of tricks that you can go to auteur directors and find things that you can pick from them and see if there's some way that you can duplicate that. So I was kind of interested to know, you know, who are your go-to directors for action, you know, that you would kind of get your head in that space before you kind of sat down and started plotting your sequence.
Miyazaki, James Cameron, Adventures of Robin Hood, Seahawks and the Seahawks.
So you took Michael Curtiz.
Or Michael Curtiz.
Uh-huh.
Howard Hawks. Well, no, Howard, maybe not. You can look at John Woo. I mean, Jackie Chan. When I was, you know, I mean, basically, when I was working with Vic Cook, we were doing Jackie Chan in the jungle. So, I watched a lot of Jackie Chan.
Was that when we were doing Tarzan?
Yeah.
Yeah, Tarzan and Jane.
Yeah.
Yeah, we shared an office. Didn't we share an office, Brad?
I don't think so. Not on.
For some reason, I think it was you, me, and then there was a guy who actually did storyboards in classic film, and I know he remember. I don't know if he brought them in and showed he had done storyboards for the Ten Commandments, and he still had the original boards.
Doesn't ring a bell.
Okay. Well, then it was some other Brad. Maybe it wasn't.
Brad Pitt.
Worked on the cartoon version, the TV version of Tarzan.
Yeah.
It's possible. But then that would have been a fun gig. Well, I got a board queued up on my other screen.
All right. So why don't you show us?
How do I show you?
Oh, okay. Go on the bottom of move your cursor down to the bottom of the Zoom.
Okay.
Does something pop up? It's a green button. It says share screen.
Share screen, okay.
Okay, click on that. Okay. Now, when that pops up, it'll give you should find your window that you want. There you go.
There you go.
Now you can show just that. You can just show the window too. Like you don't have to show your entire desktop if you didn't want to, but it's okay. I'm just letting you know you do have that option too.
Well, how do I have it take up the entire thing?
If you go back to the share screen option, go back down to your share screen. You should just have that window that you can highlight because it'll give you an option, the desktop view or just that window view.
Well, it's too complicated.
Okay. That's okay. You got your stuff up so we can see it. That's fine.
Now, this is the opening sequence of the first episode of Roswell Conspiracies and Myths and Legends that I did as a director for Joe Pearson back in like 1997 or 1998.
I think this was 98. Yeah, probably about 98.
and this is basically a complete redraw in Photoshop, because I was trying to use my board from it, but the cleanup artist really sucked and the reproduction really sucked, so I ended up basically redrawing the whole thing. So it's basically, the scene is a ragged shoreline in Ireland where banshees are gonna, trying to do this mystical rite. Okay, the backsurf camera, the banshee is screaming, backing way further, and then you cut to the shoreline, the waves crash, and then you pan up, and then you see the Stonehenge-like architectural setting on top of the mesa, and lightning flashes, changing the lighting, and then you lightning flashes, lighting changes, and the woman crash again, crash, and then you pan across all the banshees, and then you have the master shot, lightning flashes again, changing the lighting, and then you see the queen banshee mob, and the lightning changes again, and the truck out, and there's Shalani, who later becomes a character in the series, about to be sacrificed, and Shillelagh or whatever, and then she's looking and like she's pissed, and then pulls out the daggers, and the banshees, when they start to express their banshiness, the physical form alters, and then all the banshees are like expressing as the ritual reaches its climax. She comes up, she's getting ready to stab. Da, 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 da. No, okay, final moment, just about to die. And then the Alliance arrives. They rise up, and you see all these crafts, and the lighting changes again as they come into camera. Oh, that's it.
Very nice. That looks great.
It's like what I was talking about with the lighting being really important.
One of the yes, you really used a lot of lighting there for sure. It's beautiful. The one of the things that that you did, and I think it's important as well, and I always tell people this. To me, I always like depth, and I always like, especially in action boards, more than anything. I like things going from big to small or small to big. In terms of acting and or action, things moving through camera. But one of the shots that you had there that I thought was just beautiful was the shot of the banshees like howling, and the tongue, like her tongue, that pan that you have. I think it's outstanding. I think there's some really nice. There's some really nice stuff. But the pan with keep going.
I was when I was like looking at my work as I was like redrawing it, I was going, damn, I'm good. Hire me.
So it's all the shots are beautiful, but the one that you have of the pan with all the banshees in it, like that's a great shot too. Like there's so much nice, foreground depth, and it's always about the composition and getting everything. We'll talk about that in a second, because this is composition as well. But the shot that I really like is your pan that you have. There it is. You start. It's a great angle, and the way that the camera moves, it just gives it so much depth. That you really feel that this character is surrounded. It's hopeless almost, like it's just, it's this hopeless situation. But it's just a beautiful composition. It's a really, really nice composition. I really like that composition a lot.
All right, well, there's one.
So very good. So the awesome job, Brad. See, so whoever sees this, you should hire Brad immediately. So give him some action stuff, because that's what he'll give you, and it's great stuff. So, Dave, do you have any is there anything that?
I don't have any action stuff. I have it on an old computer that I can't get into right now. So
okay.
when we do comedy, I'll have some.
All right.
I'll have some of those boards.
That sounds good. So I think that in terms of talking about stuff for myself, for action, I like things moving. I like when you're in the actual action stuff itself,
Uh-huh.
and even looking at Brad, some of the thumbnails that you have up here, Brad, like that Roswell Conspiracies, the one that you have, you have some, that's a really dynamic composition. So is the Spawn, Stripperella the same way, all like these shows have movement in the even in the little thumbnails that you have there, like of Stripperella, she's clearly like skating over and like or she's being dragged by the car. Is she holding onto the bumper? Oh, here we go. So she comes through. Yeah. It's like, and there's just a sense of movement to everything when again, you're talking about spatially, right? What you guys are saying,
inside of
in a limo, right? In a small area, tight area, right? You had to really think about that when you were doing it, right? You had to really plot that out and plan it out logistically. How can I make this work in a tight space?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you really worked it well. I'm looking at this. I'm going, yeah,
that's a difficult action sequence. That's
all. What Brad did. That's all you need right there.
Yep. It's because if you don't compose that well, it's going to be confusing and weird. And you kept everything there. I would, we're going to open this up tonight. We're doing something a little bit different tonight, guys. I'm going to let people, once we kind of get through talking a little bit, if you don't mind, I'm going to open up the mic and I will call on people and they can ask questions.
Yeah.
Okay. You guys okay with that?
Yep.
That's great, Brad. That to me is like a master class in staging action in a really tight and closed area. And I dare, like, that is something that would be hard for the most seasoned person to get. If I got that in a board, I would be sitting there going, oh my God, like I really have my work cut out for me, because that is not an easy thing to do.
Well, the beauty,
dynamic.
For me, the beauty of that scene, Brad, was the fact that not only did you keep it active inside the car, but you kept it active outside of the car too.
Yep.
Two things were kind of moving with and against each other. So, I mean, even when we were inside the car, you always felt that they were inside of something that was in motion, and that things going on inside the car was affecting the way the outside was moving. Now, whether you planned it that way or a number of years later, you look back and you say, damn, I'm good. Look at I did that,
well, the interesting thing about this series, like working on Stripperella and working on Batman, was how easy it was.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't pulling all-nighters on this stuff. In fact, on Batman, I was barely putting in a 40-hour week, and I was helping other people make their deadlines.
Uh-huh.
It was very strange. And Stripperella was just the same thing.
Sometimes things flow, and they're just easier.
Yeah.
So they're just easier.
Well, I don't know how to get out. Stop sharing. See if that works.
There you go.
Should I stop sharing? Or you done?
Yeah, stop sharing. It's good, but that's good. We can always go back if people have questions.
Okay.
See what. So click off of the stop.
I like that.
So one of the things that I was thinking about, just in talking about directors and and films that you might look at, I even though I would, if I had to do an action scene, I definitely went to action directors, John Woo, or I always liked. I sometimes I hate myself for it, but sometimes I even would go back and look at the first Bad Boys movie, just because it had a nice cinematic style to it and nice editing. But I also found looking at a Gene Kelly musical, because I always felt that action scenes, it's like I had said earlier, it's choreography, and knowing how to stay on a shot and when to edit the shot rhythmically, so you never see the edits happen. You just keep the audience engaged, because you're anticipating what they want to see, before they know they want to see it. And so they're constantly, you're just